You are standing in the center of a hall, 400 feet long. The ceiling vanishes somewhere far above you. Your brain simply wasn't evolved to process a scale this vast. You try to speak, but your voice dies before it reaches the walls. It isn't an echo, it's an absorption. The marble beneath your feet is reflecting sound frequencies that dissolve human speech into white noise. You aren't in a cathedral. You are inside an engine of psychological conditioning. Welcome to Tempelhof, the largest building as a weapon ever conceived. And before you dismiss that as hyperbole, you must understand what the word weapon means when it is applied to the very walls around you. In 1936, Ernst Sagebiel received a direct order from Albert Speer. Build a structure that will still be standing in 1,000 years, even if Germany loses the war. It wasn't poetry, it was psychological engineering. The result? A 3/4-mile complex clad in limestone to mimic Roman ruins, but with a modernist steel skeleton lurking within. An architectural lie calculated to deceive your very perception of time. This has a name, Ruinenwerttheorie, the theory of ruin value. The premise was brutal. Should the Third Reich fall, its buildings were to decay with the same aesthetic dignity as the Colosseum. Tempelhof was designed to be a beautiful ruin, but aesthetics were merely the tool. While you are staring at fake limestone, your nervous system is being bombarded by a tsunami of tailored perceptions. The main hall has a ceiling 60 feet high. This is no design accident. In neuroarchitecture, we call this the Diminishment Effect, the precise distance at which architectural scale suppresses your sense of personal agency. Your reptilian brain reads this space and concludes, you do not matter here. The acoustics of the marble generate a reverberation time of 4.2 seconds. It sounds technical, but the result is purely psychological. You cannot have a private conversation. Every whispered word bounces off the walls long enough for anyone in the hall to overhear without even trying. The Nazis called it Aural Surveillance. You might call it paranoia. But reflect on this. How many buildings have you entered in your life that made you feel small? How many malls, airports, or corporate lobbies where the ceilings were too high, the voices echoed wrong, and you had that haunting sensation of being watched by the architecture itself? Here is the uncomfortable truth. Tempelhof was never truly decommissioned. The airport closed in 2008, but the device of suppression Ernst Sagebiel invented is alive and well in our daily lives. In shopping centers, in banks, in every space where your behavior is being steered without your consent. Tempelhof is the manual, and you are living inside the latest edition of the machine. The question isn't, why did they build this? The question is, why did we never stop? Albert Speer, Hitler's chief architect, had an obsession. He spent years studying why Roman ruins still commanded reverence a millennium after the empire fell. His conclusion: the material dictates the story told when you are no longer there to tell it. Limestone ages with dignity. Reinforced concrete? It crumbles like an exposed skeleton. Speer created a rule. Every monumental building of the Reich had to be designed for its future ruins. This wasn't architecture. It was spatial necropolitics, deciding how power would be perceived even after its own decomposition. Tempelhof is the ultimate expression of this logic. The facade? Massive blocks of Bavarian limestone, each weighing over a ton. The same stone used in the Pantheon. But here is the trick. Inside, the skeleton is 100% modernist steel. This isn't hybrid construction. It's embedded historical forgery. The limestone is there to gaslight your brain. When you look at that facade, your visual cortex processes antiquity, permanence, inevitability. But you are looking at a shell, a stone suit of armor worn by an industrial machine. The Nazis called it eternity value. But we call it spatial gaslighting. The goal isn't to build something eternal. It's to build something that looks eternal enough for you to accept your own insignificance. Think about it. You are standing before a building mimicking ruins from 2,000 years ago, yet it was built in 1936. Your brain tries to calculate the timeline and fails. This cognitive dissonance isn't a bug. It's the primary feature. While you are busy processing time, you aren't questioning the space, and the space is where the control happens. How many banks have you entered with faux marble facades? How many courthouses with neoclassical columns that support nothing? How many corporate headquarters clad in imported granite to simulate tradition for companies that have existed for barely 15 years? Ruinenwerttheorie is not history. It is a method. And Tempelhof is the manual everyone has read, even if they refuse to admit it. There is a second device at play in Tempelhof, one that isn't noticed. It is merely felt. While the limestone lies about time, what sits above your head deceives you about space. The Tempelhof canopy, the curved roof stretching for nearly a mile, is one of the largest structures ever built. A 40-meter horizontal projection, without a single supporting pillar. From an engineering perspective, it is a miracle. From a neuroarchitectural perspective, it is a psychological death sentence. This is what happens to your brain when you walk beneath such a roof. Your vestibular system, the part of your inner ear that governs balance, is constantly making micro-adjustments based on visual cues. Walls, pillars, corners. When you remove those pillars and create an uninterrupted artificial horizon, you force the brain to recalculate the space every 3 seconds. The result? Low-intensity disorientation. Not enough for you to notice consciously, but enough to spike your cortisol levels, the stress hormone, by nearly 20%. The Nazis didn't have fMRI scans, but they had something better: empirical observation on an industrial scale. They discovered that the more suffocating the artificial horizon, the more submissive the behavior. But the roof is only half the trap. The other half is what you hear. Carrara marble. 500 tons of it. It isn't decoration. It's military-grade acoustic engineering. Reverberation time, 4.2 seconds. This creates what we call an aural panopticon. If you cannot have a private conversation, you stop trying. And when you stop trying, you internalize the surveillance. You self-censor not because someone is listening, but because the space is. The Luftwaffe's internal manuals called this spatial control through discomfort. The idea was to create environments that didn't need guards. The building is the guard. June 1948. The Soviet Union blocks all land routes to West Berlin. 2.5 million people. No food, no fuel. Stalin's bet was simple: starve them into surrender. The Allied response? To turn the greatest Nazi device of suppression into the greatest aerial logistics operation in history. During the Berlin airlift, a plane landed at Tempelhof every 30 seconds. Literally. And here is the connection rarely made. This was only possible because of the totalitarian design. In the beginning, transporting a ton of supplies cost $38. Within 6 months, that cost dropped to $34. That $4 difference, adjusted for today, saved over $140 million. How? Because Ernst Sagebiel's 1936 design was optimized for the machine, not the human. The 40-meter cantilevered canopy allowed 6 planes to be unloaded simultaneously, shielded from the elements. The reinforced concrete floor, built for heavy bombers, handled the relentless pounding of cargo planes without a single crack. Here is the paradox. The building was designed to eliminate human autonomy, to turn people into cogs. And in 1948, that elimination of autonomy was the only thing that could save 2 million lives. The architecture of suppression is obscenely efficient. When you remove comfort, when you remove choice, when you remove human friction from the equation, you maximize throughput. Tempelhof saved Berlin, not in spite of being a totalitarian device, but because it was one. And that should terrify you. Because it means the architecture that controls you is also the one that works best. Tempelhof closed in 2008. Today, it is Berlin's largest urban park. But your brain cannot process this space as a playground. Neuroarchitecture has a concept called residual spatial trauma. It's what happens when an environment has been programmed for such a specific psychological function that even decades later, your body still reads the original code. You can bring food trucks, you can fly kites, But when you stand alone before that mile-long canopy, you still feel watched. And you aren't wrong. Tempelhof was never decommissioned. The airport was. But the method, it was industrialized. Look at any airport built after 1960. Analyze the acoustics, the ceiling heights, the absence of pillars. Washington Dulles, cantilevered canopy, 1962. Heathrow Terminal 5, calculated reverberance, 2008. Singapore Changi, indoor gardens to mask the feeling of confinement while the architecture herds you like cattle. It isn't a conspiracy, it's evolutionary convergence. Every one of these structures is solving the same problem Tempelhof solved: how to move the maximum number of people with the minimum amount of friction. And the answer is always the same: remove human agency through design. Tempelhof is a mirror. It shows us what happens when architecture stops serving people and starts processing them. The reason this building was never demolished isn't heritage, it's fear. Fear that if we destroy the original, someone might notice how many copies already exist. So next time you enter a mall where the ceilings are too high, where your voice echoes strangely, where you feel small and rushed without knowing why, remember Tempelhof. You aren't in a commercial space. You are inside a control device that has had 80 years to be perfected. The question was never, why did they build this? The question has always been, why did we never stop?